500,000 human beings are already gone. Some are saying by the time the Russian Ukrainian war is over, it might go over 2 million dead. If you take one thing from this, let it be this. Tell someone this is not a conflict, it is a mass death event. Hundreds of thousands gone, families erased, children growing up without parents. Say the number out loud 500,000 lives. Because peace does not begin with diplomats or treaties. It begins when ordinary people refuse to look away and refuse to accept the war industry as just a normal part of human life. War is not sustainable. War is not responsible. War is not a path to a functioning world. It is a death machine that consumes the young, drains economies, poisons diplomacy, and pushes humanity toward cliffs we cannot climb back from. The fog of war sits over everything we know about the Russian-Ukraine war. For months, I avoided doing this episode. Every time I sat down to write, I told myself the same thing. This is too big. I'm not a general. I'm not a historian. I'm not a geopolitical mastermind. I'm just someone who believes that humanity deserves a world beyond endless conflict, and that the future cannot be built on the ruins of yet another war. But the numbers coming out in late 2025 are so much worse than anything we hear in the mainstream media that I just can't ignore it. I'm doing it anyways. So today, if my voice shakes, it's because this matters. It matters because this conflict could escalate into nuclear war. And nuclear war is not a political talking point. It is the end of civilization. We ordinary people cannot even comprehend the scale of that horror. Most of us can hardly bear to look at the black and white photos from Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Entire cities vaporized in a flash, families erased in an instant, children burned into walls as shadows, survivors just wandering through ash, unable to recognize their own skin. This is not strategy. This is not leverage. It is humanity's darkest moment. And it's impossible for any sane person to wish for or accept. The fact that modern leaders still rattle nuclear sabers as if these weapons of mass destruction are bargaining chips, it's not strength, it's delusion. It is the thinking of men who will never be the ones burning. The people of the world do not want this. They want safety, dignity, life. Nuclear war is the line that, once crossed, it has no return. So what follows is not a list of headlines or slogans. It's my attempt to look through the fog to see what is actually happening and to understand how this war fits into a much larger and more dangerous transformation of the world. And this is difficult, but let us begin with the human costs, because no one knows the exact number of dead, and anyone who claims certainty is just selling false clarity. But conservative estimates place the combined death toll between 400,000 and 500,000 since February 2022. Russian losses alone are staggering. The BBC and Mediazona have verified 149,000 names through obituaries and probate records, and they believe the real number may be twice that, close to 300,000. Ukrainian military deaths lie somewhere between 70,000 and 140,000. Civilian deaths stand at more than 22,000 confirmed and likely closer to 30,000 once these occupied areas are fully counted. That is not a statistic. That is 500,000 shattered families. And it forces us to ask, why does humanity continue to invest more in perfecting weapons than in perfecting peace? Some say this is a proxy war, but the truth is layered and more nuanced. From Moscow's viewpoint, a conflict where the West pours in more than 360 billion without deploying soldiers looks exactly like a proxy war. But Ukraine is not a mercenary state. It is defending its own survival. Russia is the side that crossed the border with 500,000 men. So, yes, this war contains proxy elements, but at its core, it remains a direct Russian invasion. Calling it only a proxy war shifts this responsibility away from the party that launched the attack in the first place. Another topic that refuses to disappear is the question of US linked biological laboratories in Ukraine. And here's what little we know. So, Ukraine has dozens of labs that received American funding after 2005. And their stated purpose is securing old Soviet pathogens. What we do not know is the full scope of their work. These facilities are not open to the public. Their operations are classified. Their oversight, it's not transparent. Claims they are purely public health labs, those cannot be independently verified. And claims they are bioweapon labs, they also can't be verified. But the truth is simple. These labs operate in secrecy. And when institutions operate in secrecy, people just fill the void with suspicion. And this is why humanity needs these transparent systems, not opaque ones. Trust is the foundation of peace. Secrecy, it's a seedbed of fear. And now we arrive at a subject that it just can't be ignored. Corruption in Ukraine and the way it shapes both perception and reality. Ukraine has struggled with corruption for decades. It ranks near the bottom of global corruption indices. The war has made these issues worse. Estimates suggest that 15 to 30% of certain aid streams may be lost to inefficiency, mismanagement, or outright graft. That is ugly, and it's real. Hunter Biden's role in Burmisa is another example of how corruption just intersects with geopolitics. He earned about $1 million per year despite no experience in Ukrainian natural gas. It was influence selling. It looked bad because it was bad. Then there are all these allegations around President Zelensky and hidden wealth. Public records do not show mansions, yachts, or high-valued assets in his name. But Ukraine is deeply corrupt. Elites often use what's known as nominee owners or offshore networks to conceal assets. There is no public evidence that Zelensky stole Western aid, but there is no independent mechanism as well to verify whether assets could be held indirectly. The deeper point is this: corruption corrodes everything it touches. It destroys trust. It fuels cynicism. It gives oxygen to propaganda. And it makes peace harder to build. Corruption does not excuse invasion. It does not erase responsibility. But a country fighting for survival also needs integrity. Because without integrity, even the bravest soldiers bleed for a system that may not honor their sacrifice. The Vietnam War comes to my mind. There is another dimension that receives far too little attention, and that's the manpower crisis on both sides. Ukraine is under enormous pressure to find new soldiers. Credible reports describe aggressive recruitment practices, including men being taken off the street and pushed into vans. It shows a country stretched to its limits. Russia faces different pressures. Ukrainian intelligence has identified at least 155 Chinese nationals fighting for Russia. North Korea has supplied Russia with millions of artillery shells, at times making up to nearly 50% of Russia's available ammunition. This is not only a European war, it's becoming global, shaped by the ambitions of East Asia. And it reminds us that wars expand like a fire. One spark becomes a blaze. One regional conflict becomes international. And this is why I pray level heads must prevail. This is why diplomacy must evolve. This is why humanity cannot gamble with nuclear weapons. NATO's position, it's widely debated. Some argue NATO wants endless war. But NATO has kept its own troops out of combat. It refused a no-fly zone, and it's supporting peace negotiations in Geneva through Trump diplomatic channels. Putin says he's ready for peace, but he's demanding Ukraine's surrender and NATO withdraw from Europe. NATO's approach has been to help Ukraine survive just long enough to negotiate rather than give up. That is not the same as perpetual conflict. But here is the deeper truth. Our world cannot survive another century ruled by military blocs. We need peace centers, not battlefields. We need conflict resolution academies for our young people, not recruitment drives for the meat grinder. We need new diplomatic paradigms that treat war as absolute failure. Historical claims also just add to the fog of war, like the idea that Kiev is the historical capital of Russia. It's a misunderstanding. Kiev was the center of Kievan Rus 1,000 years ago, the shared ancestor of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. But shared heritage does not mean ownership. After the Mongol invasion in 1240, power moved north to Vladimir, then to Moscow, later to St. Petersburg, and back to Moscow. Back and forth. Kiev was never the capital of the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union. History shapes identity for sure, but it does not grant ownership. If it did, Mongolia could claim half of Eurasia. All of this sits inside a deeper global transformation. Keep in mind, for 80 years after World War II, the world operated under a multilateral system. It was imperfect, but it offered stability. But now that system, it's unraveling. We are moving into multipolarity, a world with fewer shared rules and more transactional ambitions. In such an environment, alliances shift quickly and miscalculations just become more likely. And miscalculations are how wars ignite. The center of global power is shifting from west to east and from north to south. India, China, Brazil, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, South Africa. These are not emerging powers. They've emerged. They want greater responsibility in shaping global governance, not under American rules, not under European expectations, not under Russian nostalgia, but under their own visions of the future. But here's the danger. If the world becomes multipolar without becoming wiser, we risk turning the entire planet into a chessboard where human lives are just expendable pieces. And this is why humanity must rise above the territorial ape mindset. We are Homo sapiens sapiens, the doubly wise human. If we cannot choose wisdom now, when the cost of failure is nuclear annihilation, then when will we? This just brings us back to Ukraine. Legally, this is Russia's war of aggression. Russia crossed the border. Russia launched the invasion. But geopolitically, this war is a symptom of a much larger shift. For Russia, it is partly a challenge to Western-led global system they believe no longer reflects reality. For much of the global South, the war is not about choosing Russia or Ukraine. It's about questioning whether the post-war system still serves their interests. None of this justifies the invasion, but it reveals the tectonic plates moving beneath this conflict. This is why we must teach the youth the real horrors of war. We must build peace institutions. We must create new diplomatic initiatives. We must reject leaders who casually threaten the use of thermonuclear fire. They do not represent humanity. They represent the most primitive instincts of our species. All the money spent on weapons could uplift the entire planet. It could eliminate poverty, build infrastructure, advance medicine, support science, fund education. There is no shortage of money, only a shortage of imagination. When I began writing this, I was terrified of saying the wrong thing. I still am. But after reading all the reports and all the leaks, all the propaganda and counter-propaganda, one truth remains. War is a failure of imagination. Peace is a triumph of it. 500,000 human beings are already gone. If you take one thing from this, let it be this. Tell someone, this is not a conflict, it's a mass death event. Hundreds of thousands gone. Families erased. Children without parents. Say the number out loud. 500,000 lives. Because peace does not begin with diplomats or treaties. It begins when ordinary people refuse to look away and finally decide to rise above the ape before the ape destroys all of us. Thank you for listening.